This past week, ACA held its Staffing Summit. The virtual conference featured speaker panels, roundtables, and sessions. They shared practical solutions around addressing the staffing shortage, innovative ways to recruit staff, and best practices for staff retention. And we're going to hear all about it today from staff training expert Kim Aycock.
Do you ever feel like you're spending so much time at the office that you have no time left for camp? With UltraCamp, you can track attendance, manage staff applications, and streamline registration so you'll be back outside in no time. Find out more at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by GoCamp Pro. We have created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their kids, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine. And we need to help each other bring our very best. Today, we'll be tackling the question, what do we do to give our staff their best experience? And what have we heard at the ACA Staffing Summit? So to dig into this really important subject, we have a very special guest with us, and we could not be more excited that she's here. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves. Gabs, would you like to go first?
Yeah, well, my name is Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp directors at Camp Waro. Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada, and we focus on creating a positive environment for gender minorities.
Thanks, Gab. And to our special guest, Kim, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Kim Aycock. I call myself the CCO, the Chief Culture Officer of Kimspiration. That's the name of my business. And I entered the camp world as a staff member at a camp in Wisconsin, did the whole counselor, waterfront director, program director, assistant director, did the school camp thing as I was a teacher also, and then ended up at a full-time camp in the mountains of North Carolina for about 8 years. Met my husband, and then I started a consulting business where I originally kind of focused on staff training, but we'll, I'm sure, talk about other things as my business kind of expanded to include bigger camp culture and staff culture. So, and the other thing about me is I am a very active volunteer with ACA, and I was co-chair of the Staffing Summit along with Deb Jordan, and also co-chair of the Staff Recruitment and Retention Committee, which you might know it more lovingly as Project Real Job.
That's great. Thanks, Kim. And it makes a lot more sense to me now to know that you were a teacher, because you're such a great speaker and teacher when I've heard you at conferences. And I'm Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and GoCamp Pro. As a camp consultant and a trainer, I build on my experience as a director and executive director and 43 summers at camp. And my passion is building solid, supportive, and purposeful communities through intentional and thoughtful leadership training. Kim, we are so thrilled to have you join us today, and we can't wait to hear all about the ACA Staffing Summit. So welcome, and thanks for your willingness to be a part of our podcast this morning. Alrighty, let's dive in because we have lots to talk about. Our listeners are well aware of why we at Camp Code are so passionate about staff training and leadership development. So Kim, we would like to talk with you about that. Why are you so passionate about staffing needs, and doing the best we can for the people that work with us?
So I am that kid who used to play school in my basement, and I had like the teacher, the desk and the blackboards and all that kind of thing. I loved learning, but I realized at some point that, especially when I saw myself struggle, and then I also noticed my classmates struggling, that there must be, a better way to teach material so that it made sense. And I noticed a lot. I was a math teacher, so a lot of math anxiety, which just meant that people lacked confidence. They didn't feel sure about themselves. And so when I started going to camp conferences in the early 90s, when I actually did the math on that, I was like, holy cow, that's like 30 years ago. And just ate up those sessions with Michael Brandwein and Bob Ditter and, other Georgie Jorgensen. And at some point I was like, you know what, I think I can do this too, because of the teacher in me. And I was always bringing back ideas to school and to camp. And I was also really intentional about trying to make school more like camp, but never trying to make camp more like school, right? So in my own sort of consulting business, I just really started working with camps of all different, I say, sizes and shapes. So there's no one model for, what camp is today. It means a lot to so many different people. And so I've always had this kind of philosophy that the teacher is truly the leading learner or the leading facilitator. So I see myself as a facilitator of learning and not the talking head kind of person. And that comes from that experiential being at camp, and it's an experiential classroom versus sit in your desk and kind of,
right.
Face front, don't say a word, that kind of thing. And I just really enjoy the challenge of creating something new and under varying circumstances. But knowing that staff they are the key to any camp's culture and program. And I think we do the fire hose method of just giving them so much information at one time. And and they really just don't have an opportunity to process that information and reflect on that information and really think about it. What does this look like? Put it into practice, using those teachable moments, coming back and revisiting things, after they've had a little bit of time under their belt. So those are the things that get me up in the morning. Like, I get really fired up about just how can we make, the learning stick? How can we help these emerging leaders take their knowledge and their expertise, which I think they sort of sell themselves short. They don't think they have as much knowledge and expertise as they really do. And then put it forth so that they can create those magical camp experiences for the campers. And
now you know why Kim Aycock is on Camp Code podcast. Right there. All of that.
Kim, my mind is swirling with so many questions and aha moments. First of all, in Camp Code, we love teachers, and the way teachers can look at things and format it in a way where staff members can absorb the most information without, as you mentioned, it being a fire hose situation. And of course, like, the intentionality behind everything is so important. I'm curious, this past 18, or 24 months has been such a whirlwind, and it's been so destabilizing. What are some of the main issues that you're hearing about from camp directors, from staff members, just so camp directors can properly prepare themselves for this summer?
Great question. So the opening keynote speaker, who was Raquel Carl, she's the Senior VP of Human Resources at REI. She did a Menti at the beginning of her session, and the question was, what was your biggest pain point for, the past summer or summers in terms of staffing? And if you looked at the word cloud, the word that was front and center, that just kept growing in size and anchored the rest of the word cloud, was the word commitment. And I think that's an interesting word to think about. If you looked at the, sort of as you got out into the word cloud, you saw lots of like lack of commitment, not showing commitment. You also saw ghosting, which I think is a cousin to commitment, because if you don't have commitment, or you don't have ties to some place or some people, then you don't have a, so then the ghosting phenomenon shows up, which I know that was something we heard loud and clear from camps all across the country. Staff not showing up for an interview, staff not showing up for staff training, or maybe even leaving in the middle of the summer and not completing a contract. So, and this is where I'm going to give a shout out to my dear friend and colleague, Jolly Corley. She and I took and really looked at commitment and really like dialed down into that word. And one of the things that we, in our many conversations about this whole idea of commitment, is so often I think we sort of, those of us, and I'm looking at the three of us in this podcast right now, like we're of a certain generation. And so a lot of times we say, well, these kids today, or these young people today, they can't commit to anything. They don't, follow through. They, all of these, whatever things that we say. But have we really thought about, are we setting them up for commitment? And are they really, when we say they're not committed, what we're really saying is they're not committed to camp, or they're not committed to us. And I'm going to use the word yet after that. Because when you first meet somebody or you just get an introduction, they, all they have to go on is they saw you on a website or, word of mouth or some little way that they connected with you. There's no commitment yet. They don't have that trust and that, those bonds that have formed where the commitment is strong. But that doesn't mean they're not committed to other things. They're committed. They may very well be committed to their families or to their friends or to their school or to a job or to, the art or music or sports or whatever else. But to sort of say, oh, this generation is not committed or don't commit, I think we're really missing out on the bigger picture here. And also I started thinking about this because I had a nephew that lived with me for a couple of months, and he was early 20s, and I would watch him just look for jobs. And he would look on Indeed and other, online sources. And yet I would never see him really making any phone calls or, sending emails out. And one day I kind of approached this subject with him, and I said, can you tell me a little bit about your strategy for, getting a job? And I discovered in my conversation with him that it was commitment. He was afraid about making that email or making that phone call, that he was committing to something that he wasn't ready to commit to. But really, they just want more information. So how can we give them the information they need? How can we help them understand the reality of the job and what it entails so that they do want to commit? So that's one big theme, I think, is just really looking at the commitment. And so as I talk some more, I'll have some ideas about how we can think about the commitment. Yeah, for sure.
I love what you're saying. And I think that, for me, with the generational gap, as you get older as a camp professional, you're going to start to not always understand where your staff is coming from. And I think traditionally, it's always been that staff have to work to understand their bosses. Staff have to work to understand the organizational's culture. They have to conform to the workspace. And it's not new that, that there's generational misunderstandings from each other. This has been from the
dawn of time.
The dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love what you're doing with Jolly is really looking at the why behind, we're looking at commitment, sure, but let's go a little bit deeper and understand where this fear is coming from or where this anxiety is coming from, so that once you have the understanding, then it's just so much easier to tackle the problem, which is it's actually just creating connections, giving more information and picking up the phone. There's a great little bit with Steve Martin and Martin Short in a TV show that's just recently been put out, and they're about to call Selena Gomez. And as Steve Martin picks up the phone, he looks at Martin Short and says, "Wait, should I call or text?" And Martin Short says, "They seem to get angry when we call. Maybe do a text." And it's just that shift of understanding, how do we communicate? So it might be intimidating to make that phone call, and having more information on your website or so on and so forth. I love that approach that you're both taking.
Well, and there was also an interesting blog that we read, and a podcast. It was also a podcast, but it's there's an organization in the Atlanta area called Growing Leaders, and Dr. Tim Elmore was actually a keynote speaker at Tri-States years and years ago, and I wasn't able to go to his keynote, but for some reason I went on his website, and I signed up for his blog, and I've been getting his blog ever since, and I love the way his company approaches, because it's growing leaders. It's, how do we grow those emerging leaders? And he always takes the high road with young people versus like, how can we work with them instead of, smash them down? How can we talk badly about them? All of those kinds of things. So he had a blog, and it was actually about commitment, because we're not the only ones struggling to get commitment from, this age. I mean, coaches and, sports and, different clubs and organizations are having the same sort of issues. And you also know, you're seeing help wanted signs everywhere. So employers. So he sort of boiled it down to the whole idea of doing it in reverse. So like 20, 30 years ago, it was all about, in order to belong, first you had to believe what we believe. So like kind of embrace the values and the mission and the vision and all those kinds of things, and then behave like we behave. And then okay, now you belong to this group or this organization. But if you look at what young people really value today, and I think you mentioned it, Gabs, about the connection, and it's really about those relationships. And so how can we build that relationship first so that we can have the belonging that young people are truly craving? And so that's the flip. And so if you really look at like, how can we, and this was a theme that was talked about a lot at the staffing summit, there was a lot of using the word belonging, and how do we, welcome folks? How do we bring them in so that they do feel like they belong and they and that's more important than having them lean into your mission right away. And so it's like connecting with the individual, getting to know them, building that relationship, sort of helping them stick their baby toe in the water, a little bit at a time. So then they feel like they belong. So then they really want to lean into the mission, and they're going to act in ways that support that mission. So I thought it was a really interesting flip of just those three words, right?
Really smart.
And the part that I love that stood out for me is, how can we build that relationship first? Not come to my camp, we're going to build it along the way. How do we do that first? I'm keeping that in my back pocket.
Well, and if you look at, so let's go back a couple, 2 years when we were doing everything in person, and you'd go to a job fair, and you see, table after table after table with display, and there's all these, bright shining faces and smiles, and there was never, you never saw the homesick kid on the display, right?
Right.
But if somebody,
that would be an interesting take, to be honest.
You never saw the spider in the shower, you know what I mean? So, but so often camp directors are, they're selling their program and they're selling their property. They're like, we have 1,052 acres, and we have, this great gaga pit, and we're adding axe throwing this year, and all of these things. And we're missing the opportunity to build the relationship and form that connection with the staff member first. And so I'm going to brag on Jolly a little bit. She will tell you, like, if she would go to a job fair, she always had people at her, at her table, and other camps are like, why do you always have so many people at your table? She's like, because I'm not talking about camp. And they're like, what do you mean you're not talking about camp? And she's like, I'm trying to build that relationship. I'm trying to get to know this individual so that they can then see themselves the possibility of being at camp because they have, things of value to contribute to what we're doing, what our mission is. So just an interesting little flipperoo.
Because it's not just a sales pitch. It can't be just a sales pitch to come and work at camp. It's not what they're looking for. It's not what they need. And it's not, if we look at the big picture, what we as camp people need.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
Great. Was there anything else that sort of popped up over the course of the summit, Kim, that people were really struggling with or trying to, chew on over the winter?
I think another thing that is the flexibility. I think people are really struggling with how can you be more flexible and more adaptable? Like we expect our staff to be flexible and adaptable. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we all know that's what one of those great skills that you come away with from camp. But sometimes I don't think that we model that ourselves as much as we could. And I feel like with all of the sort of the angst with work environments and things like that we're going to have to think outside the box to really if we're going to come up with some really good solutions that are going to stick for the long term. And so I actually talked about this with Andy Pritikin and his crew on the Day Camp Pod a couple weeks or months ago already, but noticing how some camp directors who really leaned into this summer and actually have probably done this leading up to the summer as well. But thinking about for a day camp, for example, do they have to work, like these really long shifts? Do they have to work 10, 12-hour shifts, or can they work 6-hour shifts? Or can they work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week? Those kinds of things. For overnight camp, there's a camp here, actually they're my neighbor, they're a couple hours away in North Carolina. They only have their first year staff stay for 4 or 5 weeks. Like they sort of stop, how you're supposed to stop an experience while people are still having fun. And so that's kind of the idea, is to get them to that point where they're really starting to buy into camp, but then not, with some exceptions, of course, having people stay the whole summer, but getting them while they're still excited about camp and then they want to come back to camp. That's a radical shift because, it's much, much easier to have those staff members who are going to work 10, 11, 12 weeks because then you don't have to hire as many staff. Right. But I think it's a flexibility thing again. To get that veteran staff member back that's going to add so much to your program and to your community and just they're, the rock star. Do they have to be there the whole summer? Can they, and there's all kinds of things that, we can sort of push back on with some of these ideas. But I think over the long haul, we're going to have to really think about them and to implement some of them. And I would suggest, having your staff sort of brainstorm this with you. This is empowering them to help be part of the solution. So what's going to work best for our situation? Those kinds of things. So, and if you think about it, this is kind of another interesting thing Jolly and I have been talking about, but if you look at just like your sports teams, how many players truly play the entire game? Really, it's like your best players are the ones, and sometimes your best players only go in for a certain, like your kicker, your field goal kicker, you only go in when it's time to kick a field goal. Or you may play like, in my example, way back when in volleyball, like I only played the back row because I was not a strong, spiker or, that kind of thing, but I could serve and I could get the ball to the front row. And then they took me out. So how can we sort of build those experiences. And I'm thinking of like the camper to staff pipeline, the CITs, LITs, whatever acronym you choose, how can we, really, they're kind of on the bench. How can we prep them for when they're in the game so that they're ready to go in, they have the stamina, they're ready. And again, that's kind of that dipping your toe in a little bit at a time so that you kind of build up those experiences and just over time you're ready to handle just about anything.
Excellent. And it's funny you say that, because we're gonna be talking about that on our next podcast, as a matter of fact, Kim. So
Really?
Yes.
nice way to get us a little bit of ad time about that. All right, well, before we continue with new and innovative ideas that Kim has learned at the summit, and I, for one, cannot wait to dive into these, we have some words from our amazing sponsor. Hey, friends, do you remember your why for getting into camping in the first place? I'm guessing it didn't involve sitting in front of a computer screen clicking in a database. Sometimes all the busy work and button clicking associated with running camp keeps us from seeing why we're there. That's why we encourage you to get to know our friends at UltraCamp. UltraCamp helps you get back to spending time remembering why you love working at camp. How do they do this? UltraCamp takes the stress out of using their registration software. With UltraCamp, you don't have to worry about limits. UltraCamp offers unlimited custom reports, unlimited support, unlimited training, unlimited users. And if you think this all sounds too good to be true, it is real. Visit ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Our friends at UltraCamp would love to show you a future where you finally have the time to get back to what's really important, running camp. Visit their website, ultracampmanagement.com/campcode, and set up a time to chat. Okay, Kim, so we have talked about some of the big staffing issues that directors are dealing with. Now we want to talk about some of the solutions. So what did you hear, or what did you personally speak about at the summit that can give our listeners some solutions to the commitment issue, to thinking about staffing and hiring in different ways than we've done for the past 125 years?
Yes. So first of all, I'm going to say that one of the things that we kind of set up the whole staffing summit at the very beginning was to if we could, camps really collaborated and really dug into working together as a team to solve, sort of get through the pandemic. And we saw so much collaboration. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing for the staffing challenges that we're facing. So we really want to really push that idea of collaboration. And I love, there's a quote by Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And so that idea, I think if we start thinking of each other as partners in this versus competitors in this, it's going to help the whole industry, right? And then I also want to give a little disclaimer. So because we had 30 some sessions, I think, plus the 3 keynotes, I'm obviously not going to be able to mention every single session, every single speaker and conversation that happened over those 2 days. So if I'm not mentioning someone or a topic, it's not because it wasn't worthy of that. It's just, for time's sake, we obviously had to kind of, pick and choose a little bit. So, one of the sessions that I was involved with that I will mention, and it was an interesting session. Dr. Daniel Shore and I were sort of partners in crime in this, but we worked with a group of camp directors for an hour every Friday in October, and we called it Innovation Boot Camp. And we brought these folks together and we taught them some innovation techniques, and they came, with their challenges around recruiting, hiring, and retention. And then, so over the course of those 5 weeks, we helped them take some sort of innovation techniques with their challenges and then work together to come up with some solutions. So we ended up with 5 teams, and then they got to present their final pitches at the staffing summit. So that was really, it was super fun.
Love it.
And the cool thing about it is that a lot of times you think when you innovate, you have to come up with something that's completely new, like it's never been thought of before, but that's not actually the definition of innovation. And so it's really taking an idea and maybe another idea, and then how can you sort of bring those two ideas together? And so that's what we saw with these 5 teams, is they really embrace the, coming up with something that's already out there, but also adding a little twist from something else, and then seeing where it would go. So I'm hoping that the session, the recordings will be available after this, for a while after this podcast has aired. So I'm going to send that link to, but that's definitely a session worth listening to, because it's your peers who work together, and they were on teams from people they didn't even know, right? And so there's that whole group dynamic thing, and the teams were a little fluid, just like camp, just like it really is a simulation of camp, basically.
Yep.
The other thing that it does is it provides a model for how you can have like an innovation boot camp at your own camp. So again, I was talking about having your staff brainstorm and help you come up with solutions. That there's so much value in empowering them and bringing them into that. And so another thing that we could definitely go down the path of is engagement, because engagement, once a staff member, signs on, whether they're a returning staff member or a new staff member, leading up to the time when they actually show up at camp, for some people, it could be a few days. For some people, it could be a few weeks. And for others, it could be a few, months. And so how do you, and there's so many distractions and other opportunities that could pull them away. So as something like an innovation boot camp is something that you can do to help sort of build, that belonging, that sense of community, and help them buy into the process, because they're actually, coming up with solutions for various things. So.
And of course, if you've hired these people, they're going to be brilliant. So,
exactly,
pick their brains, because they're likely to have better ideas than we do. So it's win-win-win all the way around. We just have to make time for it and, be intentional about it. But we always talk on Camp Code about involving the staff and getting their perspective. But there's just so much positive reasons, so many positive reasons to do that. It almost makes you ask why you wouldn't.
Well, and like I said, we did it for an hour over 5 Fridays. So it was like a 5-hour, and then there was some outside time, that happened to get ready for the final pitch. But anyway, the 3 keynote speakers were really phenomenal. So it was Raquel Carls, who I mentioned earlier, was she's the Senior VP of Human Resources at REI, and then Chika Eloy, he is on a D&I team at SecureWorks, which is a Dell, under the Dell Technologies umbrella. And then Dr. Mandy Baker, who's also going to be with the Women in Camp Summit in a week or so, right? So she's a researcher, but they all have camp backgrounds, and so they could bring this outside perspective of the corporate business world, but they could speak the camp language. And it was really fun to see how their messages definitely had their own flair, but they complemented each other very, very well. And I heard each one of them mention how it's so important to go back to your values and making sure. So when we're staffing, really knowing what your core values are as an organization, but also being very interested. And that's how we build that relationship with our staff, is finding out what their value system is and what really is important to them, because they will align themselves with like-minded, young people today, you hear, will support or buy a brand if it models or aligns with their value system, or they'll be part of an experience for that same reason. So every single one of them talked about really knowing, what your values, who you are, who you stand for. So then once you find out what the staff members values and what's important to them, what their belief system is, you can kind of connect the two. And then the other thing that kind of came out that was a theme for all three of the speakers was they talked about in some form or fashion what I'm going to call like the staff. You know how you have like the customer, kind of how the customer enters your business or organization, and then how they go through the process, and then how they exit your brand, that kind of thing. Well, if you think about that in terms of staff, so Deb and I actually spoke about this at the Southeastern Conference, and we're going to speak about again in the national conference, but we talk about the staff experience journey, and all three speakers had different labels for the journey, but it was talking basically about the same thing. So that moment that somebody enters, they first find out about you, they're exploring to work at camp, and they have this idea that maybe they want to work at camp. Where do we go? Where do we put ourselves out there so that staff who might be aligned to working with camp can find us, for one. And then how do we excite them? How do we, get them excited about working, at camp? But again, it's not selling camp. It's building that relationship, right? How do they embark on this journey? How do they, like, when you look at your application process, your interview process, all of those kinds of things, are there any, are you gatekeeping? Are you making it difficult? Are you having a hard time, or staff dropping out because it's too cumbersome, or it's not, do you need to ask their t-shirt size the first, on the first round of questions, or their social security number? Probably not. And so there was a brother-sister duo, Aaron and Esther from Camp Hire, who did a really nice job really thinking about, how you bring people in. And they were big fans of having a very short application, just to find out the basic information. And then you can continue having conversations with them. And then when you really are ready to hire that person, then you get all the information that you need, kind of thing. How do we set those expectations? So staff know about the hiring process, they understand, they kind of, know what the timeline is going to be, making sure they, have that. We're not holding that from them. There's no need to not tell them the things that would be important in that way. And then also being realistic about the job. How can we tell the great things about the job, but then also build it in a there's some things like spiders in the shower, or it's going to be really, really hot, or, whatever your different scenario may be. And so really walking them through.
Talks about making sure that reality and expectations meet. Because things go off the rails when staff get to camp and they don't meet. Yes, that's
and I think we
important.
heard a lot of that this summer. I think that was a big thing this summer. We heard that staff didn't, they're like, what? I didn't know I was supposed to be, this was part of my job, which also goes back to hiring the right person versus hiring for a position. So sometimes they think in their mind they're hired to be the tennis instructor or the lifeguard or the this or the that. And that's kind of where they're focused on, not realizing that there's a whole lot of other things in the community that it would be, awesome if they were part of and helped, foster some of those things within the camp experience. But in their mind, they're thinking they're coming here to teach tennis, or they're coming here to, teach archery, or whatever the situation may be. So how getting those right people so that they buy into, and they're going to do whatever it is that you need, whether it's, and Jolly will tell you, she had 14 staff members this summer who it was not on their job description that they were going to be at the barn scooping poop, but that was what was needed and they all they understood that you contribute to the community, and so that's what they did. They went out and scooped poop, and they did it happily.
Well, and that
So
getting back to, you're building that community, you're hiring a team of people who understand they're working together as part of a team for the duration of your season, and not that you're hiring the individuals. Travis and I always hired for the person, and you could teach the skills. You could
Mhm.
teach them how to become an archery instructor. You could teach them how to become a canoeing instructor, whatever it happens to be. There are courses you can send them on, all that kind of stuff, but you want to hire people who are excited and passionate to learn to be a part of a bigger community. And that can sometimes involve shoveling poop
It really can. There's
if
nothing
you have a
like
barn.
poop to bring people together, honestly.
Oh my goodness. But just, looking at that whole journey from where the moment they enter to and then as they get, closer to camp, you're the engagement that we've talked about a few times this morning already. And then how can we, help them excel when they are at camp? So that's, providing that coaching and the mentoring and the, more training, because whatever they learn in staff training, that's never enough. I mean, we think it is, and we think, okay, we've taught everything they need to know. We hope it is, but it's not, and so
Never.
sometimes we need to go back and revisit those things, setting up, the feedback and the communication and all of that, so that the person wants to then come back year after year, because it's much easier for us if we can, if we're on sort of that staff retention versus staff recruiting. So if we take really good care, I'm a big fan of the Container Store. And so if you take really, really good care of your employees, as they say, or in our case, it's our staff, then they're going to in turn take really great care of the customer, which is of course the campers and the camper families. So, again, it's a little bit of a flip right now. I think people are pretty much in recruiting mode, because they don't necessarily have the luxury of having that retention. But I think you always need to be thinking towards, the retention piece and keeping these staff members as long as you can. And there's going to be some situations where it doesn't make sense for them or for you to keep them on. But, if you're hiring for that really great person, what advancement opportunities do they have down the road, and really, thinking about all of that. So
I love the concept, Kim, of thinking about the staffing journey with you. We often, most camp directors think very intentionally about the camper journey with you. How we recruit campers, how we get them, their families, to understand our why and our mission, and bring them to camp, and how many years we will have with the camper and all that sort of thing. So we spend a lot of time thinking about their journey. And I think the really successful camps will be the ones who also spend that kind of time thinking about their staff's journey. So not, from start to finish. So even after they've spent all those years with you, and it's time for them to, enter full-time employment, and they can't come back to camp anymore, what does the end look like for them? Like, how do we thank them? How do we, help them see the legacy they've left at during their time at camp? So it's that whole journey process, I think, is a brilliant way to think about it and look at it.
Yeah. And I think too, what are ways to keep them connected even after they've, those alumni? There's other roles that they can play. I mean, they can help you find the next group of emerging leaders, right? And I think that's one thing we learned in Innovation Bootcamp is we have so many assumptions about what we think staff need or what they want, but really the best way to find out is to ask them, and to ask them in a way that that pulls the information versus pushes them towards an answer that you are sort of wanting them to give, or you're like, you in your own heart think it's this answer, but it's really not. And so that's another kind of thing in that employment, staff journey is to think about, like, at every stage, what needs do they have? What feelings might they be having? So that, and then how do we address those? And then an easy example is, if you think about, for so many, it might be their first job, and maybe they've never had an interview before. So what, if you've never interviewed before, you're probably pretty darn anxious or nervous, or, not unsure about what this is going to be. What do you wear? How, what kinds of questions are going to be asked? So one thing that we can meet them with those needs is we can provide, that education. We can let them know. It's not a mystery. There's camps who do a really nice job, who tell on their website, this is what you can expect in your interview. This is what you should wear. This is, kind of how it's going to go. And so we're coaching them, and that's another way to build that relationship. So
you're setting them up for success. And
yeah,
and I think I have a couple of staff members that do interviews, part-time with us, and it's a way of getting my staff involved. And one of the things that we teach them is, for the questions that we're asking, the primary goal is that the applicant is successful in those questions. So if they don't get it right away, try to reformat it or try to help guide them. And I think that just that mental shift in those staff members, they think, oh, in the interviews, that person has to show their best foot, put their best foot forward. We talk about role modeling, what we try to do at camp. We want everybody to succeed. Obviously, we do want a transparent type of interview, but how do you set them up for success right from the beginning? And of course, that brings that back to building that connection and commitment piece that you were talking about at the beginning.
Well, and there's one other, I'm going to throw this out here because I know you all are really good friends of Dr. G, but she did a great session about partnering with parents of staff members. And as you can imagine, there could be a lot of pushback on that, but her line of thinking, and now she's a parent of, I think she went to camp, worked at camp. She had kids that go to camp, and now she had one of her sons was a camp staff member this past summer. So she's sort of seen it from all different sides, and she's not, in her description of partnering with parents, it's not enabling the staff member. It's not, inviting, the parents to sort of have all this control, but it's really, it's a partnership. So what kind of boundaries do we set with parents, especially if you've had, it's their staff members who've been campers with you before. Right. Parents are used to being so part of the process and filling out the health form and doing all these things. It's just, we kind of have to, again, coach them and give them the information about, okay, now this is what it's going to look like this year, because now your, child is a staff member. She also talks about the when, not if, like when your child, staff member struggles, because we know it's going to happen. It's not an if sort of situation. Yes. What kind of support what does support look like for your child, who is our, staff member? And again, she sets it up very, very well. So it's very clear that this is not, parents aren't calling every day. Parents are not filling out the application. Parents are not coming to the interview, but it's truly a partnership. And she's going to be speaking about that all over at different camp conferences. So it's definitely worth that, thinking about that, because if the staff member is struggling and it's week 3, and the parent doesn't understand what's going on, and they don't understand that this is kind of this is normal, this is going to happen, and they, aren't sort of guiding the child into, sticking it out, they may say, well, why don't you just quit, And so having that conversation ahead, that, as we've talked about, you all talk about so often, is being proactive versus reactive. So. And
how many times have camp directors had to really work hard to keep that amazing staff member that in 4 years from now will need an internship as an engineer, or in, this summer, because they're 18, they need to start their, lawyer internship, and all they're really doing is getting coffee, and that they really do build those skills at camp. And parents don't know that necessarily that the growing and the learning continues as a staff member, that there's actual genuine important things that they're gaining at camp that will be helpful for that engineer student, that will be helpful for that law student, or whatever career they're going in. Parents are looking out for their kids and want to make sure they have the best possible chance of being successful, whatever that means to that family. And by closing that door, parents have a lot of influence in where kids are going to go, and just inviting them in on the learning process and the growing process, they can really become a support system to that camper or that staff member. I love that. The when not if piece is awesome.
Well, and she will also tell you, I mean, there's ways to do it so that it may be an optional thing for, because if a staff member is above the legal age, then it may not be legal or to pull the parents in. But again, there's ways to do it so that if it makes sense for so you just kind of have to take each person case by case, but especially if you've had a relationship with them, it's not like it's a journey, and just because they cross the line from camper to staff member doesn't mean that we don't, care about them any less, or we're not interested in their development, right? So it just in today's world, parents are consulted so much by their children, on a daily basis, multiple times a day. And so why not, bring them have them buy into the camp experience as well for staff members. So I could go on and on and on. There are so many great little nuggets that I picked up.
Kim, we'll just have to have you back at some point.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
If you're willing, we would love to have you back.
Mm-hmm.
We are at the point in our podcast where Gab is going to try her best.
Try my best for sure.
All this information that Kim has thrown at us. So Gab, you can take it away there.
Oh yeah, recap time. The buzz from ACA Summit. What is going on in camps right now is going on with staff hiring, staff training, retaining staff. This is not something that is unique to just camps. This is everywhere from restaurants to amusement parks to even teachers. This is a time where people are re-looking at their value system and asking themselves, where do I want to put my time? And specifically towards the camp industry, we're looking at the issue with commitment and flexibility. And is it really an issue? Of course it's not. As Kim has explained, it is just the why behind some of the issues that we are having. And when we understand those whys, connections start to happen. And there is, Beth, guess what? We have an acronym that Kim did not know that she created in her how-to.
I love it.
Yeah, I know. So this is actually a Latin root word, CEIVE, CEIVE. And isn't that nice? Root is what this means. And what we're trying to do is create those connections with staff members. So first we need to collaborate. We have to ask our staff members what is going on. We need to engage with them beyond asking what's happening, what they need. What are some solutions? And in those solutions, we can check out innovation. And guess what? I didn't know this, but innovation isn't just new ideas. It's bringing two ideas together or three ideas. Hello, I'm going to be doing a lot of innovation with my staff members very shortly. Fourth, values. In your value system, get back to your core, because when you're talking about your value system, you're going to be attracting the people that are excited about that as well. And lastly, let's not forget about the staff members' experience. From the time that they go into your website, to your Instagram, to who they're talking to, it's all part of their experience. Is there a way that we can make things easier for them, welcoming, adding more information on your website, basically we want to set them up for success. And we can't forget about their phasing out process, because those staff members, those alumni, can either help you get new staff members, or they could even come in for a weekend on that opening day. And I would just like to say thank you to Kim. I could not recap everything. Just re-listen to this podcast again. There's so much more great information. Kim, it was so wonderful having you.
Thank
Gab,
you.
a brilliant recap as always, even pulling an acronym out of there. Well done.
Mhm.
All right. And before we wrap up with our best practice, which is from Kim, of course, this week, here is how folks can connect with us and get involved in the conversation. So join us by using the hashtag Camp Code and let us know any topics you'd like us to discuss, any guests you would recommend we talk to, like the brilliant Kim Aycock, any great leadership training tips that you have to share with us. We would love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found our podcast to be useful, we would love it if you could leave us a rating and a review in your podcasting app. Your feedback helps us to keep the show going. And here is how you can get in touch with each one of us individually. So, Kim, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
I have a website. It's just Kim Aycock, AYCOCK.com, or my email is kimdaycock@gmail.com.
Perfect. Thank you. And Gabs, how about you?
You can get in touch with me at info@waro.com. Waro's Ouareau. You can also check me out or follow me on Instagram at Gabrielle Rail. Rail takes 2 L's.
Thanks, Gab. Our website is gocamp.pro. You can email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro, and I'm on Twitter at Topaz. So our next podcast, Ruby will be back. Yes, we're very excited. So as we alluded to earlier, thanks to Kim's little bit of information, we're going to be deep diving into how to develop future staff by starting with your campers. So we're excited about that one. This week's best practice is going to be brought to you by Kim. So Kim, please take it away.
So I would love to share a snippet of a session that I saw Emily Galinsky. She's Bright Moose Training. She was talking about, she has been the executive director at Camp Starfish, which is in New Hampshire. She was talking about one of the things that they do at her camp is they have created an internal certification program. So it's something that's meaningful to their setting and to their community, but it's not a certification that you take like a Red Cross training or a archery certification that you take somewhere else and you apply it to another. But it's, so she gave very clear differentiation on that. But there's a level 1 and a level 2. The level 1 is it's after staff training, they do like a mandatory staff training assessment, and you have to get an 80% or higher, and they make it in a way to help people be successful. It's not a give me, but it is, if you've been paying attention in the way, if you're intentional about your staff training, your staff are going to do well on this. And then they have a level 2, which is an optional certification, which requires a lot, some effort. It requires some endorsement from some of the camp leadership mentors, that kind of thing. And it's more about how to apply. So in a level 1, you're just sort of giving back, things that you might have learned about first aid, or how to, navigate in the dining hall, or, food allergies or things like that. Whereas in level 2, you're thinking more about how to apply this. How have you done this particular skill or demonstrated it? Why is it important? And then they recognize you with a gift card. You're considered, for leadership opportunities or advancements. They make those little wallet cards, I think she said at Vistaprint, that look like the Red Cross certifications, but she says they're a lot more campy. And then you also get your name mentioned at staff banquet. And then they've created these little pins, this little pins that you put on your lanyard. So like on opening day or any time that you're wearing your lanyard, you might have your level 1 or your level 2 certification little button on your lanyard. So it was brilliant. And I thought, very well thought out, and just something, again, for a little bit of a gamification, but also to pull staff in and give them a little more motivation to keep learning and growing as a staff member.
Great. Thank you, Kim. And if you look to our show notes, you can find links to some of the recordings from the ACA Staffing Summit. And you can still purchase those for a couple of weeks yet and learn some more of the things that we just didn't have time for Kim to cover today. So that wraps things up for our podcast. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network, and you can check out all of our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. There are amazing people on these other podcasts with very great advice, so look them up and give them a listen. And from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.